start with the big picture. I know a lot of people hear the phrase mixed energy fleets, but when we talk about that, what really is that actually looking like in the real world?
What we see from a mixed energy fleet standpoint is fleets that are starting to use fueling types beyond gasoline and diesel. Often this is electricity. You see some other alt fuels that many fleets have been using for many years. But we think about that in terms of mixed energy fleets because they're trying to handle and manage all of these vehicles that are using different types of fuel. And sometimes that means different systems for tracking how that fueling is happening. I think we see a lot of conversations maybe around where, oh, fleets, if they're electrifying, they're replacing all of their vehicles. We know that's not how fleets operate standard, right? You don't replace all of your vehicles anyways, regardless of what fuel type you're using. But what we're seeing on the mixed energy fleet side is an increasing gradual integration of EVs into existing operations based on route profiles, duty cycles, where it makes sense and where the infrastructure is ready to support charging for those vehicles, with a big kind of focus on total cost of ownership. Where's an EV saving you money relative to using diesel or gas vehicles? I think we see a lot of fleets that are moving towards mixed energy that are focusing on electrifying light duty urban vehicles first, while still using traditional fuels for medium or long haul type applications. And that makes a lot of sense. I think the key really is trying to figure out how to manage all of those different fueling types in a way that makes it easy for fleet managers to have visibility into how those vehicles are fueling, regardless of what the fuel type is.
So it's really utilizing a different vehicle powertrain based on the needs, the location, and so much more that is going into that kind of bigger picture.
Precisely.
So, I mean, fuel prices are a hot topic now and typically, and I think they're still driving a lot of decision making, even when they're not as unpredictable as they might be right now. How are those cost pressures changing the way fleets are thinking about adding EVs?
What we've seen is a lot of increasing conversations that are questions that fleets are asking around, will EVs help them bring down their overall fuel spend? And what does that look like? And I think it's coming from a really strategic standpoint, and it always has with fleets, right? Total cost of ownership is a big driver, and I think it's less for fleets, at least. It's less about reacting to one spike in fuel prices, and it's more about creating long-term operational predictability. And this happens more with EVs because if you're charging at a depot or you're charging vehicles at home for take-home vehicles, you have much more predictability around what that price is going to be. On route is different. You're going to have different prices, just like you do with fuel. But any mile that you can drive electric that is charged at either of those applications, depot or at home, is going to be cheaper than miles driven with gas or diesel. Obviously, more than just the fuel price goes into the total cost of ownership, but that is one component where we see fleets looking at EVs as a way to provide more stable fuel cost and a hedge against fluctuating fuel prices. I think that don't want to also then negate the conversations around maintenance savings and downtime reduction that you could get with EVs. So fleets are really taking all of this in. That fuel price is a big driver, but it is one component of the TCO analysis. I think another thing we're seeing around this is fleets are really focused on data-driven decisions. And so that fluctuating fuel price does impact their analysis around which vehicles are going to make the most sense. From our perspective at WEX and at Sawatch, we model those scenarios with different fuel prices so fleets can see what the impact is as fuel prices change. And it's a really helpful way for them to future-proof what their fleet fuel spend is going to look like under different scenarios.
And to really understand too that predictability that you're talking about and which fuel options might have a little bit more predictability and again based on the needs that they're having for their fleet operations.
Yes, exactly.
So, for fleets that are still curious but maybe a little hesitant, what are some of the bigger misconceptions that you're really seeing around electrification right now?
Oh, so many. But I think One of the biggest misconceptions is that it needs to be all or nothing. And we all know this in the fleet space. Fleets are not replacing all their vehicles at once. And I think there's some hesitancy around what it looks like then to operate mixed energy fleets because it makes it more complex. And so, what we're seeing is most successful fleets that are successfully transitioning, they're doing it by starting small, by being strategic about it, finding where EVs work operationally and save them money, getting learnings from that, and then leveraging those decisions and experiences to identify where EVs might work in the next round. And that's exactly the way we would recommend fleets do this. I think another misconception that I love talking with fleets about is that it's not always low mileage vehicles that are the best option for replacement with an EV. We've seen this for years where fleets are like, okay, we're going to put an EV in, we're going to place a vehicle that's really low mileage with an EV because that means we are going to ensure that that vehicle will always be able to drive, do all the driving during the day for the driver, and no one's going to be stranded. If you do that, you are making sure from an operational standpoint that EV is going to meet your needs, but you're not maximizing your savings from a TCO standpoint. It's a really fun conversation to have with fleets because that is a huge, huge topic of conversation.
So, I mean, we touched on this briefly, I think, in the misconception section, but you've definitely spent a lot of time helping fleets integrate EVs into their operations. What's something operators may often underestimate when they're making that transition?
Fleets have a really big focus on the vehicle, and they might underestimate the amount of time that needs to go into planning around their charging strategy. And that makes sense, right? It's different than fueling at a gas station or even if you have on-site fueling. A lot of organizations really dive down deep into what do they need for a vehicle, what's going to meet their operational needs. And then if they can take a step back early on in the process and think carefully about how those vehicles are operating, how long they're dwelling, and also have conversations with their facilities manager as well as their utility partner to understand what their existing utility capacity is, to project out what they're going to need from a charging standpoint, both in terms of number of chargers on site, but also what that will do to their electricity demand. The earlier you can plan that out, the better prepared you can be to get the charging station and infrastructure you need on site in line with the time that you're taking delivery of those vehicles. We definitely have worked with fleets that were able to get the vehicles ahead of the chargers, and then they end up in a bit of a pickle. So I think, if you build beyond that too, and not just thinking about the first few vehicles or the vehicles you're replacing this year, but think about what's your long-term strategy. Is it the next 3 years you're planning to put new EVs in every single year? Well, what does that get you to from a projected charging standpoint? Because then you can plan out your infrastructure needs in a really strategic fashion. Please talk to your facility staff. They'll get the right utility partner in the room in those conversations. The earlier you do it, the more you can line everything up in a way that really meets what your drivers are going to need and keeps everybody on the road.
I love it. And I think, that partnership and working with the right partners to get the information you need. I mean, nobody wants a vehicle that can't be charged. Nobody wants charging stations that don't have vehicles to charge.
I think what we try to work with fleets on is really using that data to hit exactly that spot you're identifying. You want to make sure you have enough charging so all your vehicles can be charged and ready to go whenever that shift begins, the next shift. But you don't want to overbuild. You don't want to put any additional investment in there if you don't need it, and they take up space. The chargers do. So I think you're hitting the nail right on the head.
So, I mean, one of the things that we've talked about is that, one size fits all approach, that there is this mix of vehicles and that it kind of does need to be based on needs. But saying that and really talking about optimization is, I think, two different things. So, how should fleets be thinking about balancing gas, diesel, electric, and other alternative fuels to really fit their specific operation?
The fleets that we see that are doing it well are taking a portfolio approach, and they're not focusing on the question of which fuel is best for me or what's the best fuel type. They're really thinking about what's the best option for these specific applications for my fleets, and it might look different. What works well for fleet one with their sedans might look very different for another fleet, and it might even be within different departments. You're seeing that some sedans or SUVs or even medium duty, heavy duty vehicles are a good fit for electrification, while in another department they aren't. So there's not like a one size fits all, we can follow this path. It's really about what works for your specific operations. Um, we see this from kind of that optimization starting with the data side of things, but really on the vehicle operations side. As much as you can pull that data off the vehicle, you're going to get real world understanding of how that vehicle is operating and what it needs. One of the things we talk about at Sawatch in our analysis is you'll rarely hear us talk about miles or range for an EV, because what you want to know is what are the energy needs for that vehicle to get from A to Z throughout the day, so that if it's traveling at high speeds or low speeds or up a hill or under load, or the ambient temperatures, is it really cold, is it really hot, in any type of vehicle, any type of fuel, all of those other factors impact how much energy it takes to drive those miles. And so we model all of that to then say, what does your vehicle need from an energy standpoint? And then does the battery in that vehicle, that theoretical EV that you might replace it with, does the energy in that battery meet the needs of that specific vehicle? And what does that look like then when you're looking at every single day of the year? And so we encourage everyone, look at your operational data, understand what the vehicle needs are, and then you can match which option from a fueling standpoint is the best fit for you from an operational standpoint. And then, of course, the TCO analysis, you're going to save money or not. I think the overall goal from a fleet standpoint is always operational efficiency and resilience. And so when you're doing that from a data-driven standpoint, you can figure out which of those types of vehicles best fits your needs.
And I mean, at the end of the day, it seems complicated. It can seem like a lot, but it's no different than what fleets are already doing for selecting the vehicles themselves, the truck versus the sedan versus the van for those same needs. It's just taking that one step further and looking at the powertrain and fueling for those vehicles. But again, it's still a part of that general specking conversation that's being had. Just an additional layer, I feel like, that's been added to it.
I think that's exactly right. And it's a good way to look at it. Fleets have been doing this type of optimization forever and ever and ever. And it's just one more component.
Yeah. So we've talked charging and infrastructure and selection. One thing we've not discussed much about yet has been the payment side of stuff. Mixed energy fleets are definitely going to be a little bit more complex to manage, especially on payments. I know EV charging often comes with multiple cards and options and selections that can only use, particular networks. How are these mixed energy operations able to streamline a little bit and maybe make it easier on fleet managers to pay for the electricity and fuel and everything that they need?
Yeah, you definitely don't want your drivers out there with multiple apps or multiple RFID cards, right? You want to keep it as simple and straightforward as possible, because charging for EVs was really built with consumers first. You can see that some of that works well for a consumer, where you're okay having multiple apps on your phone, and it just does not work for fleet drivers. That's not a thing you can ask of them. And so we're seeing more and more changes here, which is kind of an exciting place to be in, especially for us at WEX. The industry is just rapidly improving on the interoperability side, and bringing that data, this new data set in a unified fashion to fleet management tools. I think one of the biggest shifts we're seeing is towards consolidated payment solutions like you're talking about, that really reduce the need to have multiple cards or apps, and so that you can access different charging networks depending on wherever your driver is, and they can just pay one simple straightforward way, the way they're used to paying at the pump. We know that's from the driver standpoint. We also know fleet managers don't want to be looking in different systems to try and figure out what was the fuel spend for my EVs versus what was the fuel spend for all my other vehicles, and let me marry that with my telematics data. So there's more and more integration of how do we get data into one standalone system to make it really easy for them to then make those data-driven decisions to optimize what they're trying to do. At WEX, what's really exciting for us, we announced a combined fuel and EV payment solution that's designed specifically for fleets that have mixed energy vehicles. So it's a first for a closed loop network in North America. It's a single payment experience. It means you have one card, you can use it when you're charging, you can use it when you're fueling, if it's gas or diesel. And it just makes it nice and easy for the driver. And then also, like I said, for the fleet manager, because now all of that fueling data is going into one system. So the fleet manager can optimize everything across that. They can have clear visibility into their fuel spend. And I think we'll see more and more of this in the industry of really trying to figure out how to integrate all of that, where we don't have separate systems then based on the different types of fueling. It is very much mixed energy at that point. You're fueling how you're fueling, whatever fuel works best, and you've got it all in one single system.
I mean, as we've been talking through this, there's so many things for them fleets to be paying attention to as they're going through and changing their mix of vehicles. Trying to figure out where to look for the data that comes with it is not something I think they want to do. So having that single pane of view is really, really helpful.
Yes, no one loves logging into different systems. I don't think there's a single person out there, so it's good to have it streamlined as much as possible.
So, looking ahead, what signals or trends do you think our fleet managers should be paying attention to over the next few years as this energy mix continues to evolve?
That is a fun part about being involved in a part of the industry that is evolving so quickly. I think one of the big things would be charging infrastructure maturity. We're seeing continued expansion of charging infrastructure that's publicly accessible. I think we'll see more of this and expanding beyond the routes where they're really common. We're seeing improvements in charger reliability. All of that's making it easier and kind of more in line with expectations of what fleet drivers and individual consumer drivers expect when they go to charge their EV. And I think that reduces operational barriers for fleets. I think from another point, maybe another thing to keep an eye on is this data and software integration that we talked about. We're going to see more and more data. All vehicles, but EVs are kind of leading the way in this. They are data forward. We get so much data off of them, and organizations are figuring out how to manage that, and providers are figuring out how to manage all of that data into a single platform. And then I think the third one that I'm keeping an eye on, and it's a little bit more farther out there maybe, is related to utility engagement and energy management. There's been a lot of conversation around vehicle to grid or vehicle to everything, V to G, V to X, I think for many years. And I come from the energy space. So I think we've been hearing about this for a very long time. But fleets, understandably, are focusing on their vehicles as meeting their operations for whatever their drivers need. And I think in the energy space, you hear conversations about, oh, but that's a big battery that is overnight just sitting idle. Can we access that? And can you get more money out of it and reduce your TCO because now you're getting some financial benefit from sending energy back to the grid? I think we'll continue to see a lot of conversation around this, especially when we have more and more medium duty and heavy duty EVs that have large batteries coming into operation on the fleets. I don't know which way that's all going to shake out, but I think it'll be really, really interesting.
No, that's really, really fun. And your passion and excitement for this is just evident in how you're talking about all of these answers. Before we wrap up, is there anything else that you want to add or share or that's top of mind about mixed energy fleets, what Wex has got going on in Sawatch or anything else?
There's just so much happening in the space. Like we're seeing new vehicles come on all the time. And I think on the medium duty and heavy duty side, what we start to see in operation, once we start to get some data, the whole industry starts to get data on how those larger vehicles are doing and how they're performing for fleets. I would really want to keep an eye on what's happening there. We have anecdotally a fleet we've worked with for 4-ish years that took delivery of their first Class 8 vehicle, electric vehicle, maybe a year and a half ago. It's outperforming what we expected. And this gets to the not all miles are created equal. That vehicle operates in stop and go traffic nonstop. They're getting a bunch of regenerative braking. The drivers love it. And I think we'll start to get some insight on where those vehicles are working and where they're not, but we'll give really clear guidance to fleets on where they have opportunities to save money and get vehicles that fit their needs that are electric. Yeah, there's a lot to come. So it's a really exciting place to be in.